We are an animal that seeks to understand as part of our adaptation to the world. And so we are narrative animals. We create stories about it. And our stories rise out of what we're experiencing at the moment. So you can see why a person born into a certain culture or a certain family of origin with its style of relating or disrelating, as the case may be, becomes the ground for defining that person's sense of self. So it's important to distinguish between the self and one's sense of self. The sense of self is who I think I am. In any given moment, that's very fluid, of course. You know, we joke that lovers are fools or lovers are blind. So we know that people are they're caught in a certain projection onto the other. And, you know, that ultimately gets, resolved into some sort of reality through time and experience with that individual. But in that state of being, one senses that one's making the right decision. And no one wakes in the morning and says, for example, well, today I think I'm going to do the same stupid, counterproductive things I've done for decades, but there's a good chance we will. Why? Because we have certain clusters of energy in us that are regularly triggered. When triggered, they catalyze a response in the ego that enacts that program. So in those circumstances, we all have a provisional sense of self. And if you have a culture that says this is who you are, this is what your orders are, your marching orders, here's your script, and the more authoritarian the culture, or the more traumatic one's environmental situation and family of origin, the more likely I'm going to be reacting to that. So when I've had an experience, I'm either going to repeat it, or I'm going to try to run from it, or maybe I'll be spending my life trying to treat it in some way that I'm not aware of. The distinction between the self, which is the natural organic development of this organism. You know, as we're speaking, it's growing our toenails, digesting our breakfast, mentating, emoting, and so forth. Most of that's autonomous activity. It's kind of like the centipede. You know, you congratulate the centipede on how well he coordinates all of his legs, and then he thinks, well, should I move this leg or this leg or this? And he's immobilized. These are not functions that we govern consciously, although we can interrupt them consciously. But something is there taking care of us. It's an organic unity, and that's what Jung meant by the self, capital S. Our sense of self is a different matter. And so one of the things that I've tried to emphasize in therapy is you're not what happened to you. Because we tend to be bound to our story that says either that's who I am, that's what I'm defined by, or I'm spending my life trying to differentiate myself from that, get away from that, perhaps. So again, our sense of self is very provisional. It evolves, and in any given moment, there may be something in the unconscious that's triggered. And of course, the problem with the unconscious, it's unconscious. So I don't know that it's happened. I have the unconscious triggered. It has the power to rise, take over provisionally, spin out its program, and then after a while, you know, it recedes back into the unconscious. And as I said, sometimes people will stop and say, well, I wonder what was behind that decision, or why did I choose that path, or what in me is blocking me from doing what I know is right for me. You know, as Paul said in the letter to the Romans, though I know the good, I do not do the good. Well, why not? Well, he saw it as insufficiency of will. But we know it's more than that. We know that there are unconscious factors at work that have a certain autonomy, and the more unconscious they are, the greater their autonomy will prove to be. Most importantly is the question of meaning. If what we're doing is meaningful, as understood by the psyche, it will support us, even in the face of suffering and sacrifice and so forth. If what we're doing is wrong, as seen by the psyche, then over time it begins to pathologize. So you take that word psychopathology, literally from the Greek it means the expression of the suffering of the soul, which I think is revelatory, the expression of the suffering of the soul. Now, that seems to me obligatory to take seriously. If my soul, and again, that's a metaphor, you know, people look for the soul throughout history, and you can't find it in the pineal gland, for example.
No.
The soul's a metaphor for the organic wisdom of that natural being that we are. The soul is a metaphor for this purposeful expression of the organism. It is purposeful. In other words, question that occupies all of us in childhood and throughout the first half of life at least, if not an entire lifetime, is what does the world want of me? What do my parents want from me? What do my school teacher want me? What do the playmates expect of me? What does the partner want from me? What does the employer want? All of these are reality-based encounters with the demands of the environment. And part of what we have to do is develop enough ego strength to create a provisional sense of self and a provisional functional self to deal with those expectations. But then when you've done that, why are you still here? What's the purpose? Are you simply here to be a creature of adaptations? Now, without those adaptations, we would be overwhelmed typically by the circumstances of our lives, so we accommodate them in some way. But in the second half of life, and I'm using a term very loosely, the real question is, what does the soul want of me? What does the psyche want of me? And that's a different question. Then the issue comes up, what is it that is wishing expression in the world through me? That's a different question than what does the world ask of me? The people that we would most admire in history are people who in some way found and lived out what the soul was asking of them. It didn't spare them from suffering, sometimes even martyrdom. It doesn't spare you from conflict and pain, maybe isolation, maybe exile, but you're fed by the purposefulness of it. Take that away and life is pretty empty. And of course, we live in a culture where there's this enormous barrage of external stimuli. Well, buy this, purchase that, do this or that, the latest thing and this or that, the newest shiny thing. And the more I'm seeking to define myself through that environmental summons, the more likely I'm going to be estranged from something inside. So I spend 15 minutes every morning before starting, just meditating, particularly working on a dream if I've had a dream. And secondly, I reflect on things in the evening too, because one of the things we want to try to do is to say, what are the stories I'm living here? One of them, I've got to earn a living. One of them, I've got to do this. Another one's, I have to do that, you see. But what's all of that frenzy about, you see? That's why I think the first half of life, and I say this semi-humorously, is a huge and unavoidable mistake, because we're living just reactively. You see, it's not generative, it's reacting to whatever's going on around us. Is one's entire life to be spent reacting to things?